Where do you feel pressure in life? You ready to escape it for good? Welcome to Journey at Home, where we create content to make it simple for you to follow Jesus and live a better life. You can do two things right now to help people find this content. If you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button. And then secondly, click on the share button and send this to somebody who you think might find it helpful. Now, back to our question. Where do you feel pressure in life? Maybe it's pressure to perform, pressure to succeed, pressure to be popular, pressure to measure up or earn somebody's approval. I mean, let's be honest, all of us have a person or a group of people whose approval we value. You're always wondering if you measure up, and you have somebody you look to in order to figure that out, right? Who is it? Maybe it's friends at school. Nothing matters more to you right now than what they think about you. Maybe it's people at work. It's your boss or your coworkers, or maybe the people who report to you. You just care so much that they think you're a good manager or a good boss or a good employee. Maybe it's your fraternity brothers or sorority sisters. After all, the whole reason you rushed was so you could be part of a group of people where you felt like you belonged. So you're constantly paying attention to whether they act like they're glad you're there. Maybe it's all the other moms. You got little kids and you feel like moms are always judging how you're raising your kids. So you feel all this pressure when you invite them over to your house because, well, your house looks like kids live in your house, but you think it needs to be so clean there's no trace of a kid near your house. Maybe it's just one person. Maybe you feel pressure to win the approval of your mom, or maybe it's to measure up to your dad, or maybe for some of you, it's your father-in-law. I mean, you married his daughter, but you don't feel like he's ever fully respected you. You just don't quite measure up in his eyes. You're not quite good enough for his daughter. Maybe it's your older brother or sister. The reality is all of us look to someone to measure if we're okay. And with that comes this constant pressure to compete and to win and to prove you're good enough, you're worth enough, you're successful enough. Doesn't matter if you're a Jesus follower or not. I mean, this is just human nature, isn't it? Just so you know, pastors do this too. We're always watching other pastors, always watching other churches, and our fear can be the same as your fear. If we take our foot off the gas, we'll fall behind. But if that's true, none of us can ever escape the pressure. The problem is eventually the pressure will catch up to you and you'll crack. So is there a way to escape it before it gets us? This is episode 2 of our series, Revolutionary, the Empowering Invitation of the Cross. The cross is the most recognized symbol in the world, but I think it might also be the most misunderstood. For most modern-day Christians, the cross represents a way of believing, but in the first century, it represented something far more powerful. It was a way of living. It was an invitation to a different, countercultural, alternative, but not intuitive, revolutionary way of life. To be honest, I'm not sure most American Christians even realize this way of life exists. Maybe you don't realize it because you were taught that Christianity was a one-and-done thing. Just pray a salvation prayer, get baptized for bonus points, and then you're done with it. It's back to the real world. The challenge is when you go back to the real world, when you go back to what Jesus called the kingdoms of this world, you go back to a race without a finish line. In the words of King Solomon, you go back to chasing after the wind, a race where we grade ourselves and compare ourselves and measure ourselves against all the other people who are chasing after the wind too. It's a way of life that fuels disappointment and discontentment in us. But because we don't know there's any alternative, we dive in deeper, we just try harder. But eventually all that pressure, you know what it does? It wears you down, it wears you out. Now just to be clear, do not misinterpret this to mean Jesus is anti-ambition or anti-achievement. He is not. We were created by God with ambition and for achievement. It's part of the image of God stamped on our souls. But out of place or out of balance ambition and achievement will eventually leave you empty. They're great goals, but poor masters. And let me remind you, if you are a Jesus follower, well, you already have a master, don't you? And his symbol is not a checkered flag or a trophy or a crown. It is a cross, the symbol of suffering and loss and shame. But it serves as an empowering invitation to a better way of life. An invitation, as we're going to see today, to live for the approval and agenda of one instead of everyone or the wrong one. Now, nobody in the first century had more clarity around the difference between the way of the world and the way of the cross than someone by the name of Paul. Paul was extremely ambitious. He's very driven. In his own words, he prided himself on being the best-in-class Pharisee before he became a Jesus follower. He outworked and outobeyed everybody around him. Nobody followed the Jewish religious law better. He was moving to the top of the kingdom of his world really fast. And then he met Jesus personally, and he realized there was a big difference between his kingdom and Jesus' kingdom. By the standards of his kingdom, well, it looked like Jesus had lost. But the reality is Jesus lost on purpose for a purpose that included you and me. So by losing, Jesus ultimately won. Now, if you hear that and think, Matt, that makes no sense. Or if you think, that's just dumb. I'm not interested in a way of life that prioritizes losing to winning. Well, Paul would understand. It's why when he introduced this way of the cross to a group of Greek-speaking, educated, ambitious people in Corinth, he starts by acknowledging what seems so obvious. He writes, "For the message of the cross is foolishness." In other words, it's crazy and it's backwards. Seems to make no sense. Everybody knows life is a win-lose game. You're telling me it's a lose-win game? Who's going to believe that? Nobody wants to join the losers club. I'm not signing up for suffering, for shame, for pain. I'm out. And Paul goes, I get it, but hear me out. For the message of the cross is foolishness, he writes, to those who are perishing. Literally, this means to those who are currently fading away. He says, I get this doesn't make sense when you think the way of this world is the only option out there. It makes no sense if you believe this life is all there is to life. Well, if that's true, you better fight and scratch and claw for everything you get. You better look out for yourself first, because if somebody else wins, you really do lose. If they get a piece of the pie, you never get it. But here's what Paul knew. That way of life where you're constantly looking to someone to measure if you're okay. That way of life is doomed to create inescapable pressure and ultimately failure. Because you're going to be forced to cling to whatever gives you value and meaning and worth, even though it is perishing. It is fading away right before your eyes. You will cling to your fading reputation, or your fading beauty, or your fading youth, or your fading health, your fading hopes and dreams. So the way of the cross, choosing to lose. It really might seem foolish to you, but in the end, you're going to lose whatever you're clinging to anyway. So there is an alternative, even though it's not intuitive. Paul says, but to us who are being saved. Now, he is not referring to a one-and-done salvation prayer. That's different. He's referring to the ongoing process of learning how to follow Jesus and embrace his way of life and change how we think until we see the world the way Jesus sees it. He's saying to all of us committed to embracing the way of the cross, Paul makes a promise. It's the whole point of this message. He says it, referring to the way of the cross, it is the power of God. Here's what he's saying. God's power begins to work in and through us when we prioritize the way of the cross. When we say yes to the way of the cross. We are saying yes to the invitation to stop chasing after the wind, to stop chasing the approval and the acceptance that can't be caught. We say yes to the invitation to stop clinging on to things that are fading away and can't be kept. And we experience what Jesus called the kingdom of God and the power of God working in you and through you to lead you to a better life. Now, you know what that looks like? It's when you see someone do something that you admire deeply, but you can't fathom how they could do it. You were that generous to them after all they took from you. Why would you do that? It feels like you lost, but I see you won by losing. Or you choose to forgive them after they hurt you that way. I don't know why you choose to lose there, but somehow in losing, you're free. That's what the way of the cross looks like. The way of the cross isn't a single decision. It is a day-to-day decision to surrender your kingdom and your values for Jesus' kingdom and his values. And through surrender comes freedom. Through losing, you win. And in choosing that, you experience the power of God within you because God's Spirit is free to guide and help you. Listen, as long as you're striving and clinging and trying, you're always going to feel the need to compete and compare. The minute you choose to surrender to the way of the cross, God's Spirit is free to produce in you. And you know what he'll produce? Well, Paul told the Christians in Galatia. He said, the fruit of the Spirit is love. That's what he'll produce. Joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That's who we all want to be. That's who we want to date or who we want to be married to. It's who we want our kids to one day marry. It's who we want to work with and work for. It's who we want our friends to be. But the way to become this person is to choose to lose all the things we're clinging to in order to win. It's to surrender to find freedom. That is the revolutionary way of the cross. And making that choice requires what? Well, it requires power. You need the power of God. So do I. Because we can't produce any of this on our own. So do you want to experience the power of God in your life? I got good news. You can, because the Spirit of God will live in you and bring God's power to you. But also I have bad news. You have to lose to experience that power. You have to let go. After all, the ultimate loss for Jesus, his death on the cross, well, it ended up being the ultimate expression of God's power, didn't it? Everybody was looking at Jesus dying and thinking, that's the ultimate loss. But by losing, he actually won. By losing, God's power was available to him, and it's available to you. So do you want to experience the power of God in your life? You choose to live for the approval of him, of one, over everyone. You choose to find your value and worth by looking up and not looking around you. You choose to surrender. And with that surrender, you find freedom. You lose to win. Now, some of you may be going, wait, I still don't understand. I don't know what this means. I don't know what this looks like, Matt. Okay, we'll keep talking about it next time. But I want to leave you with a clue to follow. When you find yourself facing a disagreement or a tough decision at work or something hard at home or school this week, I want you to ask yourself a simple question. What would choosing to lose look like in this situation? Because doing what Jesus would do in that situation will probably feel like you're losing. But here's what I know. That moment is an invitation to the way of the cross for you. It's an opportunity for the power of God to be experienced in you. It's an invitation to stop chasing after the wind, to trade all the pressure you feel for God's power. Maybe you should give that a shot.